Hilchas Schirus Perek Chamishi. Hasoichers a behema v'chol se'in status. He rented a behema, and this behema became ill or became a shoita. Oy nilkechol lavedas hamelech, who was taken away. Lavedas hamelech. And afal pi she'ein seich lachzer, that the melech has no intention of giving it back. It was taken away, and it's no longer going to come back. Is im nilkecha derech halichasa. If it was taken while the behemoth was walking, or it was in the road, so then harei amasker emal hasecher harei shel lechol ufanecha v'chayiv litn lischarim mishalom. And now this din goes on both of them. So in other words, the din is the Mishnah really puts both dinim together. There's in other words, you have a mitzvah, a person rents something, so he has to pay for the rental. Now this behemoth became ill, so l'chura right now it doesn't have the same type of usage as it had before. But nevertheless, since it's still usable, as the Ram will see behemshach, that we're talking about a type of work which is still usable even though it's a cholso and status. So therefore, the masker tells the seichar, I rented you this animal. This is the animal you have, and memela you have to pay for it. You have to pay for it. This is the animal you have. You have no tinus to be. That's benegeya if it became cholso and status. Benegeya if it was taken lavedas hamelech. So also over here it's a different avana. Over here the word is because since it was taken derech hilucha. So if Lamashal the people came into the houses looking for behemoths, so in Mela we say that the masker lost his behemoth. He rented him a behemoth, they took away the behemoth. So in Mela the seicher doesn't have to pay the masker. But since it was taken away b'derech hilucha while the seicher was using it, so the masker could say to the seicher is mazol chagarim. In other words, I rented you an animal, and lepel the way you were using not that it's his fault. But lepel, while he was using the animal, that caused that it should get lost. It's not like it's a fault, but lepel, that's what happened. So therefore, I still am entitled to the rent. And memela hareshel cholu fanecha. This is the animal that I gave to you, and go find it by the melech. It's hard to understand a little bit. In other words, the Rambam holds that you have to pay the full original rental price in both cases. Other Rishonim argue. Other Rishonim hold that this whole din is not benegea paying the rental price. The rental price, you're sure you don't have to pay. The question is only, does the masker have to provide him with another animal? So we're going to soon learn if a person said chamer stam, so sometimes there's an obligation. If the chamer dies, so then the masker has to provide the seicher with another animal. Because if someone rents someone an animal and the animal dies, and he told him chamer stam, like we'll learn in halacha beis, so in such a case, the masker has to provide the seicher with another animal. In the case that it became ill or it was taken lavedas hamelech derech hilucha, so then the masker doesn't have that obligation to provide the seicher with another animal. But on the other end, the seicher doesn't have to pay the masker for the animal that he's not using. The animal became ill or the animal was taken away, so the seicher doesn't really have a right to use the animal. But the Rambam doesn't hold like that. The Rambam holds that in both cases, not only does the masker not have to provide the seicher with another animal, but actually the seicher has to pay the masker for the animal that he's not really having, because lepel kilo neimer, he had a schus to use that animal, and that schus he still has. The animal is not really so functional, or the animal is taken away, but lepel, he has a schus to use that animal. It's hard a little bit to understand. Let's read the Rambam again. Haseichers habehemoth, someone rents an animal, and v'chol sein status, that's one case. Another case is oinilke chol avedas hamelech. It was taken away for avedas hamelech in a way of afal pisha and sefer lachzer, that there's no intention of bringing it back. The melech, they took it away for avedas hamelech and it's not coming back. As now in this case, by nilkecha avedas hamelech im nilkecha derech halichasa, it was taken while he was walking. In other words, they didn't go into the houses to take it. So the din is in both cases, side by chol sein status, and side by nilkecha avedas hamelech, and it's ein sefer lachzer, and it was nilkecha derech halichasa. So in both cases, harei hamasker emol l'seicher harei shel cholu fanecha, and v'chayev litn l'scharim mishalim. He has to pay him the schar mishalim for the animal, which is not so easy to understand. Then bamedvar mamurim, as like the Raiva points out, and it's also not so clear in the Rosh and the Rambam, but it's pashut that's the pshat. Bamedvar mamurim is going on now in the first case. Bamedvar mamurim that you say that he has to pay scharim mishalim. That's b'shes sochra losis olam masi she'ef shel hashlichim le'akpada. In other words, he was renting it in order to carry in our things which aren't fragile, and even if they fall down, so nothing, it's not geferlich. So even though the behemoth was cholsa in the status, it's still functional. Obviously, it's not as good as it was originally, but it's still functional. Avalim sochra lirkivala, if he rented it in order to ride on it, to carry on things which are fragile, is chayiv lahamid lechayiv chamir. So then the original owner can't say, listen, you have this animal which is cholsa in the status. This animal which is cholsa in the status is bechalal cannot be used for what I need. And im sachem imenu chamir, and b'imlei hamid, and if he wasn't maimed a chamir acher, is yachzer aschar. So the masker has to return the schar. The yichashiv al schar mashalach, and whatever, in other words, whatever he went with it until it became a cholsa in the status, so that he has to be machashiv with it. Is nachamal. So there's two cases over here. There's a case over here of cholsa in the status, and there's a case of it was taken lavedus hamelech. In the case of cholsa in the status, we say that if he rented it in order to carry on it something which is not fragile, so then he could tell him harishal chol ufanecha, and memela he has to pay him the full schar. That's what the Rambam passes. He has to pay him the full schar. If on the other hand he rented it in order to ride on it, or to put on something fragile, so memela he can't use it anymore. He can't use it for that what he rented it for. So really, the masker is chayiv to be maimed him another chamer because he made up with him that he's going to rent him a chamer. So memela chayiv lahamid lechamer acher, and lepel if lepel he's not maimed him a chamer acher, so the seicher just pays him whatever the, let's say if he was able to go with him halfway, and before it was nishtatis, so then he pays for that halfway, and then he says he gives him back the animal, and he says the rest of the money that knows if the Schirus was a certain amount of money, so then he gives him back half of the Schirus, and then he goes ahead and rents another animal. That's the din benegeh cholse in the status. Benegeh, if it was taken lavedus hamelech, so there's no tznoim over here. It was taken lavedus hamelech. If it was taken derech hilucha, so the Rambam paskins that he tells him areisha lacha lefanecha, and he has to pay him even though he's not really using the animal at all. But lepel he has to pay him for the dmei aschirus, because lepel he tells him that it's mazol chogarim, and therefore you still have to pay for the dmei aschirus. That's l'chora what comes out from the Rambam. Halacha beis. Now this is talking about, so we had a case of cholsa in the status, where over there there's a difference if it's fragile or not fragile. Then we had a din of it was taken lavedus hamelech. Now halacha beis, mesa behema nishbara. The behemoth died, or the behemoth got broken, and those you can't use the behemoth. Is ben shesachra losi, is ben shesachra likkev, regardless, because lapel right now it's not functional. Is so as I say, im amalei chamer stam ani maskulacha. If he didn't say chamer zeh, he said chamer stam. I'm renting you a chamer. So then chayev lahamid lechamer acher mikol makom. So he's mechuyev to provide him with another chamer. Because he said, I'm renting you a chamer. Lapel the chamer that he rented him is obviously not usable, it died. So Mamela, he has to provide him with another chamer. The im lehamid, and if Lepel he didn't provide him with another chamer, is since he told him, he gave him a chamer, and he says, he obligated himself to provide him the chamer, is yesh l'seicher limker ha-behema, so the seicher could go ahead and sell this behema which the seicher rented, and velika ba-behema acheres, and go use the carcass to buy another behema. Oi, seicher b'domeh, if lepel, there's not enough money in the nevela in order to buy another behema to be able to ride on. So he goes, uses the money that this carcass is worth. So in other words, the masker is obligated to fulfill the tanoim of providing him an animal, because he told him that I'm giving you a chamer. So he gave him a chamer, and lepel that chamer died, so he has to provide him either with another chamer, or the seicher has the right to take from this chamer that he provided him in order to see to it that he should get to his destination that he originally made up. So in other words, there's an obligation of the masker to provide the seicher with that means of what the seicher needs. And so either he provides him another animal, or the seicher can use the animal which he gave him originally in order to get there. So over here, the masker is limiting his obligation. He's saying chamer zani maskalacha. He's not saying chamer stam. So as I say, im sochra lirkivala ele kleis chuchis. If the Seicher clearly said that the reason why he needs the Chamer is because he has to ride on it, or he needs to transport Klei Schuches. So that's an indication that he needs for it to be done all the way. In other words, on one hand, the masker is saying Chamer Zeh. He's not saying Chamer Stam. But on the other hand, the fact that the Seicher is saying that he needs it for Klei Schuches or he needs a Lirkev Aleh, so that's like showing that he needs him to fulfill the whole job. And if he's not going to fulfill the whole job, he's not going to really have what he needs. Because if he's going to transport him half of the way, or he's going to transport Klei Schuches half of the way, Klei Schuches is fragile. Middle of the way could get broken if it stops and has to be transported on some other means of transport. So as I say, so the masker was limiting, so to speak, his obligation. Is im sochre if the seicher was seichet lirkev aleh Klei Schuches and umeisa b'chatzi derech. So again, the same thing. Im yesh b'domel likal beima acheres yikach. If the carcass has enough, the nevela has enough, there's enough money there to buy another behemoth yikach. V'mein b'domem likach a seicher afilu b'dmekula achi yagiel makom shepasik yimei. Just like we said before, chamer stam. So it's an obligation of the masker to provide him, and therefore the seicher has the right to use the behemoth to get to his destination. So over here also, since the seicher said that he's being seicheret lirkev aleh or for Klei Schuches, so it's understood that that's the obligation of the masker. There's no money there in order to reach the destination. So the seicher has to pay him for half of the way because sof kol sof he did get further than he was originally. So he has to pay for that hanoah, for that benefit that he had. He's supposed to provide him. He has a chiyuv to provide him really with the full job. And Lepel, he didn't have the full job. So that's if he said, the masker said Chamer Zeh, and on the other end, the Seicher said that it's Almanas, Lirkev Aleh, or for Klei Schuches. However, Socher Lamasa, he didn't Seicher it for Klei Schuches, and not Lirkev Aleh, was to transport things. Is Hail Va'omer LeChamer Zeh, Lepel, since the masker only said Chamer Zeh, and Lepel Mes B'Chatzi Aderech is Einei Chayev Lahamed Le'acher. The masker has no obligations more towards the Seicher. So this masker only the Seicher has to pay the masker for whatever he got the benefit from the animal for the Chatzi Aderech, and he leaves the nevela for the masker. So Maskana, we have three cases really. We have a few cases. We have a case of Cholsei Nishtatis, where over there it depends. If Lepeil he was carrying stam, wasn't for something fragile, so he has to pay him for the whole way, because Lepeil it's usable. It's not as good, but Lepeil it's usable, and therefore he has to pay him for the whole way. If Lepeil he made up that he's going to ride on it, or he's going to put on it something fragile, so the masker is really mechuyev to provide him with another chamer. But if the masker doesn't provide him with another chamer, so then he pays him for half of the derech, and memela, that's it. So that's this din. So over here, there's no din, vaistuis, of this person that's the seicher going ahead and saying, listen, since Lepel you provided me with a chamer, and it was cholse in the status, and I need it for the whole way, so I'm going to go and sell this behema, and maybe sell this behema, and then buy another behema. Vaistuis, there's no such a din. Since it still belongs to the masker, and it's cholse in the status, it didn't die, it wasn't nishbara, so there's nothing talking about of the seicher going and using the behema itself in order to provide himself transportation for the rest of the way. But the masker really should provide the seicher with another animal, and Lepel, if the masker doesn't provide the seicher with another animal, so then the seicher only has to pay the masker for whatever benefit he had, and from now on he doesn't have to pay him, because Lepel is not able to do what he needs, because he has to ride on it and he has to bring on it something fragile, and you can't do with that something which was called in the status. That's the first din that we learn in Halacha Aleph. Then we learn in Halacha Beis that what happens if it died. So here there depends if he said Chamer Zeh or he said Chamer Stam. If he said Chamer Stam, so then the masker has an obligation to provide the seicher with a Chamer. And Lepel, if the masker doesn't provide the seicher with a Chamer, the seicher has the right to go and use the behema, the nevela, in order to provide himself, either to buy himself a Chamer or to provide transportation for the extension of the trip that he was supposed to take. That's because he said Chamer Zeh. If he said chamer, I'm sorry, he said chamer stam. Since he said chamer stam, so the masker has an obligation to provide a chamer. If he said chamer zeh, so if he said chamer zeh, so the masker was limiting his transportation. Says Azay. If lepel he was just transporting something. So if he's just transporting something, the masker limited his obligation, and he's stammazi transporting something. So the din is that if it died or if it got broken, so the seicher has to pay the masker for whatever benefit he had, and from here onwards, I mean, the masker takes back the nevela, and they're finished. They're finished in their business. Masha'enkin, if the masker on one hand said chamer zes, he was limiting his obligation, but on the other hand, the seicher said that he's doing it in order to ride. To ride on it to get to a certain destination, or to bring on it something fragile. So the fact that the deal was that he's going to do something with something fragile or something, he's going to ride on it, so that means that he has to get all the way to his destination. If he's not going to get to his destination, it doesn't pay, because something fragile may break in the middle if he's going to have to ride on it. So if he's going to get stuck in the middle, in other words, that's something which is more important, that he should get to his destination. So in such a case, also, he has an obligation. The masker becomes obligated towards the seicher to provide him with the whole service, and therefore, if it dies, so the seicher could go ahead and use the carcass, the nevela, in order to buy another animal or to provide himself transportation to get to the rest of the way. Halacha Gimel, haseicher es asfina v'tovela b'chatzi aderech. A person rented a boat, he hired a boat. Now the Seder was you hire the boat, you pay for the rental of the boat, and the boat comes with the captain. In other words, the boat is with the captain, and he's transporting either you or the items that you want to be transported on this boat. So a person went ahead and he hired a boat to transport things, and Lepel, he was transporting things, and it was Tavale B'chatzi Adera, the boat sank. Now the mice is, normally we said before that, well, let's say when you traveled half of the way, so you have to pay him for at least half of the way, even if it died in the middle. But Lepel, since he transported it part of the way, so he has to pay per the amount that he traveled with. But over here, since the boat sank, so whatever he was traveling with obviously was lost, so you can't mun that, listen, I provided you a service. You didn't provide any service because Lepel, everything that he had sunk, so Mamela, he didn't gain anything. Now the question is, he already paid, let's say, the Balasfina, to rent his boat with the captain of the boat to transport things. Now this boat sank, so the Bala Sfina is willing to provide another Sfina. Say, listen, you paid me money for a Sfina, can move, and I didn't give you the service because the boat sank. But on the other hand, I'm going to give you another Sfina. So by a Chamer, we learned really when you stam a Chamer stam, but Lepel, by a Chamer the din is, if I rent a Chamer, and Lepel, the Chamer dies, and the person provides another Chamer, so that's providing the service. He's providing the service because Lepel, he's giving me a Chamer in order to transport whatever I have to transport. But over here, when I say Sfina Zu, if we made up that I want this boat, so one boat and the other boat aren't the same. So therefore, there could be a Hakpada that I want Dafka this boat. That's this din. Halacha Gimel. Hasoicher es Asfina, someone that rents a ship, V'tovela b'chatzi aderech, and the ship sank half of the way, in half of the way. Obviously, he doesn't owe him anything for the service that he had until now. Now, im omer le sfina zu ani masker lecha. If the masker told the soicher, I'm renting you this ship, and lepel v'socher haseicher lehila b'yayin stam, the soicher wasn't specific what he wants to transport. He says, I want to transport wine. Is afal pishin nosli aschar, even though he paid him already for the renting the boat, is yavzer kol aschar, so the masker has to return all the schar. Sharizeh emerle, because the soicher says to the masker, hoveli asfina atzma shesacharti, bring me that ship. In other words, I only made up with you to have that ship, because one ship and the other ship aren't the same. Shakpoda gedoyle yesh b'sfina zu v'ani yaviyai b'kol mokabeluk. I made up with you that you should rent me this ship in order for me to transport yain. So the Vaila, I owe you nothing because the ship sank. And the fact that you're willing to provide me with another ship, that wasn't the deal. The deal was, you're going to provide me with this ship in order for me to transport wine. And you're not providing that ship. So therefore I want my money back. That's din number one. Now, Amr le Sfina stamani masker lecha. Lepel, he didn't say this ship. He said, I'm renting your ship. And v'sochra haseicher lehelech b'yayin zeh. But the seicher says, I want to rent from you a ship in order to transport this wine. So the deal was that I'm renting from you a ship in order to transport this wine. So in this situation, the masker is in the position to say, I'm ready to give you a ship. You rented for me a ship, I'm giving you a ship. Elamai, you want to transport this wine, I'm giving you a ship. If you'll bring me this wine, so then I'll give you the ship. But since you don't have this wine, so therefore the money you paid me was for me to transport you this wine. I'm going to willing to transport this wine, but you don't have this wine. And lepel, since you don't have this wine, so therefore the money that you gave me stays by me. So a little bit, but that's this din. The masker told the seicher, I'm going to rent you a ship. And but the deal was, I'm going to rent you a ship in order to transport this wine. The renter didn't yet pay for the ship. Still, since they made the deal, and the deal was finalized, that they made a deal that he owes, that he's renting him a ship. Could be there was a kinyan on the deal, that there was a deal that he's renting him a ship in order to transport this wine. So lepel, even though the wine is no longer around, the wine sank, but nevertheless he has to pay the masker. Why? Shari Emalei. Because the masker says to the seicher, bring me the wine that you told me to transport for you. That's what you're paying me for. And I'll bring you a ship. But since you didn't specify, we didn't specify which ship it was, and you did specify which wine it is, so therefore I'm in the position to say, listen, I'm ready to provide our deal. The deal was that I'm going to provide you a ship to transport this wine. I'm ready. I have the ship. I'm ready to provide you a ship. Now bring me that wine and I'll transport it. Lepel, you can't bring that wine because that wine sank. And Mamela, you have to pay me for the service. That's this then. So again, in the first case was that we made up this ship for wine. So since the masker can't provide this ship, so therefore the seicher gets his money back. Because the seicher could provide wine, he has any wine, and the masker can't provide the ship. Over here, the second case was fakert. He said, I'll provide you a ship for this wine. So the seicher can't provide the wine because he doesn't have the wine, and the masker could provide the ship. So therefore, the masker has to be paid. Now, obviously, if he would have to, if he would have to travel with him, and that would be troublesome. And right now, he's getting paid without having to travel for him. So he has to deduct what he would rather not have to travel and get paid. So whatever he would be willing to deduct in order not to have to travel with him, so that he has to deduct now when the seicher pays him, because Lepel is not traveling with him. The seicher doesn't have that wine that they made up with someone that's involved in having to have to bring this person with his items on the ship. The issue of bottle, someone just sitting and not having to do anything. So B'kitzur, he would have gotten paid, but he would have gotten paid to transport the wine, which would have involved work on his part of transporting the wine. Now he's getting paid without transporting the wine. So he has to deduct what he would rather. Notice, what would he be willing, if he's a person has a job to transport wine with a ship, what would he be willing to deduct from his salary if he wouldn't have to work? That's he's not going to deduct everything because he needs to make money, but he's willing to deduct some of it in order to be able to be Yeshiv Bak. That's talking about, again, so we have a case where he said Sfina, this Sfina, and he said Yain Stam. We have a case where he said Sfina Stam, and he said Yain Zeh. Now, Amalei Sfina Zu Animachs Kelecha, and V'sochra Aseichel Lehelech B'Yain Zeh. They both said Zeh. He said that I'm going to give you this ship, and the Seicher said I'm going to transport this wine. So the deal was this ship for this wine. Im Nosan Aschar, if the Seicher already paid, he can't ask for him back. Because Lepel, if he's going to ask for him back, so he's asking, why are you asking me back? Because Lepel, I'm not providing you with a ship. No, but you bring the wine. You bring the wine, I'll bring the ship. No, you can't bring the wine, I can't bring the ship. Right? I can't bring the wine. You can't bring the wine because the wine sank, and I can't bring the ship because the ship sank. So in Melis, you're coming to me, you're saying you want the money back because I can't provide the ship. I'm saying you bring the wine, and if you bring the wine, I'll provide the ship. I can't provide the ship. You can't provide the wine. And al der is a fakir. Im noch naschar, Im nosan aschar, if he already paid the masker, and yochel azire. Im lei nosan, but if he didn't pay, is leitim. For again, because each one she'en ze yochel avi asfina atzmo, not the masker can bring the ship. For lei ze yochel avi ayayin atzmo, not this one could bring the wine. Now sochar sfina stam liyayin stam. Both of them were stam. He said, "You rent me a ship for wine." So then, as so if one of them says, "Listen, I want a ship. I have wine," so then obviously that person has to provide the ship, and if he doesn't provide the ship, he doesn't get paid. And fakat, if this person brings the ship, and he says, "Where's the wine?" and he doesn't have wine, so again he doesn't. If one of them is willing to be Makayim the deal, and the other one is not willing to be Makayim the deal, so then that person that's willing to be Makayim the deal is on the upper hand. The one that's Makayim the deal is the one that gets paid. The one that gets paid or the one that wants the money. Masha'en Kain, in a case where they're both not willing to Makayim the deal. In other words, this one says, "I don't have a ship," and this one says, "I don't have any wine," and we made up that you're going to provide me a ship for wine, and I paid you already. So the din is that we divide it in half. That's the din. Socher sfina stam, sfina stam liyayin stam. So then, as arei lechiv k'maschar, then they make a deal with themselves, and then each one divides it. In other words, half. Halacha dalet. Hasoicheres asfina, someone that rents a ship. Again, he rents a ship with a driver, with the captain. Uparka b'chatzi derech, in middle of the way. In other words, they made up a way to go a certain way. And lepel, half of the way down the road, down the river, he said, "I'm finished. I don't want to do anymore." Is the din is nicely schach, because since the deal was that he should bring him to a certain destination, so even though he stopped in the middle, so you can't say, "I'm stopping in the middle, Mela, I'm going to only pay you half." We made up that this is the deal, and we're going to go to further, and lepel, even though you want to stop earlier, nevertheless you have to pay schar kol haderech. Now, v'im motza hasecher mishi yaska isolei adam mokum shepasak. In other words, they went half of the way, and lepel, the secher found someone else. He says, "I don't need anymore. I don't need the ship anymore. But lepel, I'll find someone else which needs the ship for the rest of the way." And he found someone. So the din is seicher. He could do that. He could rent it out to someone else, sublet it to someone else. And now lepel, so that person will pay half of the whatever it is. And the yesh l'bal asfina olav terumas. The bal asfina has terumas because he doesn't want to deal with two people. Whereas lepel, he could do it. But on the other end, the bal asfina has terumas because l'chatchila it's easier to deal with one customer. So he had this customer, and this customer in the middle of the way went off, and he went ahead and he hired, and he got himself another customer, which this person got him. And Mamela, now he has to go. He's going the same way. But the point is that he's dealing with two people. V'chein, and the same idea, Machar kol ascherish b'sfina, li'ishacher b'chatzi aderech. He didn't find, he unloaded the ship, and now it was reloaded. The same ship was loaded, but Lepel, he was originally the owner of the schir in the ship, and then half of the way down when they stopped at a certain place, so he went ahead and sold the schir on the ship to someone else, and now v'yara too, so he went off the ship, v'ala lekech, and the new buyer went onto the ship. So now the owner of the ship dealt with one person that was transporting, and now it's the same schir, but Lepel is another person. Is neitel schar chatzi aderech min harishin, so he takes the half of the schar from the first. So he takes the other half from the second one. Now, l'chura tzach like a chiddush. L'chura the pashtus, the first one was mischayev and kol haschar, and the second one is l'chura mechuyev to the first one. L'chura the second one is like subletting it from the first one. From the Lashon HaRambam, it sounds like that the first one, since he's providing someone else to rent, so therefore he now only pays him half of the schar, and the other one is going to pay the Baal HaSfina, the other half of the schar. L'chura, he kataina, I want you to pay me all of the schar and let that person pay you. But the Lashon HaRambam is that noitel schar chatzi aderech min harishin, uschar hachatzi mizer achen. Aber v'yesh leBaal HaSfina olav terumas, the owner of the ship has tinus to the first customer. Why? There's the fact that he now has to deal with two people rather than with one person. Whereas originally he had only one customer and he would have gone the entire way. Lepel now he's dealing with two customers. So Lepel, he didn't lose any money, didn't lose any time. But Lepel, the fact that he has to deal with two people, that's something which is not necessarily that he appreciates, and therefore he could have tainus tarumas to the first customer. So from the fact that we see that the only problem is that he has to deal with two customers. But let's say if he doesn't have to deal with two customers, L'mashal, it would be a situation where he rents a house to someone, and that person goes ahead and rents that house to someone else. So really, the original Balabas is not dealing with him. That's how the Maggid Mishnah learns Pshat in the Mikana Niyemer. So and then he doesn't even have tarumas. Then he's allowed to do it. Mikana Niyemer, Shamasker Bayis Lechaveri, Atzman Kotzim. Someone that rents someone a house for a certain amount of time, and Verotza Hasoicha Lahaska Bayis Laacher At saves money, is Maskel Acherim. He could be Maskel Acherim. Shein Kiminim Nebeise. Why? Because over here he doesn't have any tightness to him. There's no tarumas to him. He rented a house, and Lepel, instead of him living in the house, someone else is in the house. But on the other hand, that's only if it's the same amount of people. Avalim hoyu arbo, that's not the mikana nilomat. Avalim hoyu arbo, that's another thing. The Rambam saying it bepashtus. Avalim hoyu arbo, if there were 4 people in the house originally, is leyiska lechamisha. In other words, you rent a house from someone, and you go in, there's 4 people, and now these 4 people leave the house, and they rent it out to someone with 5 people. So that's not that they're not allowed to, because Lepel, he only had 4 people living there, and obviously the damage which happens with 5 people is greater than the damage that happens with 4 people. We have a general rule that ein ha-seicher ashoy lahasker. So he says, by metalton there's a rule ein ha-seicher ashoy lahasker. Shari emele ein ritzein she'e pigdeni biyadacher. Abel the karke besvina shari baila imo. The baila is the chwitis with the karka with the svina. No, it's not like it's in his rishus pigdeni biyadacher. Is ein emrim came. We don't say this musig of ein ritzeini she'e pigdeni biyadacher. And v'chein aniyemer. So the Ram is saying another din. Im amalei balabayis l'secher. The balabayis says to the renter, balabayis rented a house to someone, and now this renter wants to go ahead and rent it to someone else. So Balabais says to the renter, listen, don't rent it to someone else, give it back to me, and don't pay for the time that you weren't there. You won't have to pay. Normally you have to pay. We made up a time. You're going to rent it for a year. You live there for a half a year. Now you want to rent it to someone else for the next half a year. So the Balabais says to the renter, don't rent it to someone for the next half a year. Give it back to me. And you'll only pay for the first half a year. So that also, that din is with the Balabais. V'chein aniyemer, im amali Balabais l'secher. Balabai says to the Seichel, Lama titra v'tasker beisil achirim. Why are you going and bothering and renting it to someone else? Imle tirtza lamida, you don't want to stay there anymore. Say, v'hanichei v'ata potter mischirus. You'll be potter from the time you're not there. Is eine yochel askir leacher. So then the renter cannot rent it to someone else. Why? Shezeh bal timna tev mebalov. Knows this? Why hold back good from the person that owns it? Achat maskir leacher. Instead of renting it to someone else, you're only renting it to someone else in order to save your rent. Is hanach lezeh basically leave this person this house. There's someone there's those that hold that a renter can't sublet it. He can't sublet it to someone else. He has to pay the full rent, and he can't go ahead and rent it to someone else. The Rambam says that he doesn't hold that this is a dinams. Halacha Vov. Now we learned that there's a difference when a person says Chamer Zeh, or if he says Chamer Stam. When a person says Chamer Zeh, so then his obligation is limited. It's only his obligation is on Chamer Zeh. If Lepeil, the Seicher said that it's a Lirkiv Olav, so then we assume that he's going to see to it that he should go Kol HaDerech. But in a regular way, there's a limitation. That I'm saying Chamer Zeh, I'm only renting you this Chamer Zeh. Lepel, if something happens to the Chamer, so Lepel, so I have no more obligations. Masha'inkim, when a person says Chamer Stam, Ani Masker Lecho, so I have to provide you a Chamer. And if that Chamer died, so I have to provide you another Chamer. I don't provide you another Chamer, so there's dinim how you could get from this Chamer another Chamer. But I'll call upon him, when a person says Chamer Stam, it means he obligated himself to see to it that that person should have a Chamer. Masha'inkim, when he says Chamer Zeh, I'm renting you this Chamer. I'm not obligating myself to provide you a Chamer. I'm providing you this Chamer. Al der is there when you rent someone a house. So when you say I'm renting you this house, so my obligation is this house. I don't have more of an obligation. Masha'inkim, when I say I'm renting you a house, so even though Lepel, I'm giving you a certain house, but if that house doesn't work out, so then I have obligation on me to provide you a house. That's this din. Halacha Vov. Bayis Zeh Ani Masker Lecha. I'm renting you this house. Lepel v'achar she'eskira lei nofal. So the din is Eini Chayev Livnese. So the person that owned the house is not mechuyev to go ahead and rebuild the house. You have to make a cheshbon how much time did he spend in the house before it fell. And the owner of the house gives him back whatever the amount of schirus that he took, which he never really actually lived in the house. That's talking about if it fell. But if the owner of the house went ahead and was seis of the house, so then it's chayiv l'hamid bayis acher, because he told him he's renting him this house, and lepel he ruined the house. He knows he had an obligation. He rented him this house, and he went ahead and caused him not to be able to live in that house. So maybe he has a chiyuv. So then he's either chayiv l'hamid bayis acher or yaskele kamesi, or he should go ahead and rent a different house for him. V'chein, that's one situation. V'chein im chazer acher she'eskira lezeh v'eskira yemachri legoy yanis. In other words, he rented someone a house, and then he went ahead and sold this house that he rented to someone to a goy, or he rented it to a goy, to someone that could force him out. So basically, he obligated himself for him to be able to live in his house, and now he's causing him not to be able to live in that house. Sheifkiya schira sarishin. So the din is harei zachayev lahaskalei bayisacher k'meisa v'chei k'yetz b'zeh. Nachmal. So when a person rents someone a house, when a person says stam bayizeh, so the only obligation is to provide you this house. If you are the cause that you shouldn't be able to live in this house, the mashal, you broke the house, or you went ahead and sold the house, so then you have an obligation to see to it that that person should have a place with the state. Masha'en kein, if you weren't the cause of it, it just fell, so then you have no obligation. Then you make a cheshbon. How much time did he live in the house, and you pay him back. That's the din if you told him bayizeh. However, halacha zayin hiskale bayistam. The person didn't say bayizeh, he said bayistam. And then va'achal shnosan libayis, after he gave him a house, is nofal, the house foul, is then chayiv livnesi. He has to rebuild the house. Or to give him another house, even though he wasn't the one that caused it. But his obligation was, the deal was that he's going to provide him a house to live in. That was hiskale bayistam. The imhoya cotton and abayis shenofal. And if the new house that he's providing him, in other words, he first gave him one house, but he didn't tell him he's giving him bayis. He was hiskali bayis, and he gave him a house. And lepel, the second house is smaller than the first house. The seicher can't say, listen, I want to have a house the same size as the original house that I lived in. As long as the second house is called a bayis. He was only masking a bayis tam, so it has to be a house which could be called a bayis. But on the other end, it doesn't have to be the exact size as it was the original house. He didn't say bayis, but he said bayis because this type of a house I'm being maskelecha is chayev lahamid le bayis kemidas orke umidas rochbe shebayis zeshero. He has to give him a house which is similar to the dimensions of the original house. That when he said bayis kazeh, he didn't mean the size of the house. He only meant the area of the house. When I said kazeh, I didn't mean the size, I meant the aspect that it's close to a river, or close to the market, or close to the merchants. He has to give him the house with the same type of house. In other words, if he told him bayis kazeh and lepel, the house fell down. So if he told him bayis zeh, so again he's not obligated more than this house. If he told him bayis tam, so he's obligated to provide him a house, but he doesn't have to give him such a type of house. He has to give him a house that's called a house. But if he said bayis kozeh, not zeh, but bayis kozeh, so then he has to provide him a house the same dimensions like the previous house. If the original house was cotton, is liyasenu gadol, because Vice says there's a mile sometimes in a cotton l'gabi a gadol. There's more to clean, there's more involved. Gadol, if the original house was bigger, is liyasenu cotton. Echad, if the first one was one room, is liyasenu shnaim. You shouldn't make it two rooms. Shnaim, if the first one was two rooms, liyasenu echad. You shouldn't make less windows. And you shouldn't make more windows. So in other words, if he made up with him that he's providing him a house similar to this house, he has to provide it similar to this house in all these aspects. Halacha ches. Hamasker aliyah stam. He says, I'm providing you an upper floor. He's again, chayev lahamid le'aliyah. He didn't say aliyah zu. He said, he's chayev lahamid le'aliyah. Now, omole aliyah zu shal gabi bayizeh ani maskelecha. He didn't just say aliyah zu, but rather he said aliyah zu, this upper floor, which is on top of this bayis. So over here we say Hare Shibid Habayis La'aliyah. Over here he's obligated to give him this aliyah, but he's also, the bayis becomes obligated to the aliyah. In other words, by adding aliyah zu shal gabi bayis, the bayis becomes like subservient to the aliyah. Lefichach im nifcheso aliyah barbot tvachim yeser, and those arbot tvachim of the floor of the aliyah got ruined. Mainly you can't stand on those 4 tvachim. Is yemot is chayiv lahasker 4 tvachim is arba barba. So that's the shir of a mokim. Arba tvachim is the shir of a mokim. Is chayiv hamasker lahasaken. So the masker is mechuyev to fix the floor. You know, because he's supposed to have an aliyah. He knows aliyah zu shal bayizeh. He's providing him an aliyah. Lepel right now there's no aliyah. So Mela, the landlord, the person that owns the house, is mechuyev to go ahead and fix that upper floor. V'im leitikin, and if Lepel, the person is living on this aliyah, and the balabayis is not being misaken. So since he said aliyah zu shal gabi bayazu, so basically he was mishabed the bias to the aliyah. So therefore, zari asecher yored v'dor bebayis in balabayis achi yisaken. The seicher could come down into the house and live with the balabayis. No, whereas normally if he said aliyah zu, so then this aliyah, he has a right to be in this aliyah. He has a right maybe to mon, that he should fix the aliyah, but lepel, that right doesn't give him the right to go down to the bayis. Masha'inkin, when he says aliyah zu shal gabi bayizani maskelecha, so it becomes the bayis is mishubit to the shibur of the aliyah, and therefore if the aliyah is not being provided properly, so he could come down into the bayis. Now hoyishtei aliyah zu al gabi zu, there were 2 upper floors, there were 3 floors in the house, and v'nifcha sehel yena, again he told him aliyah zu shal gabi bayizeh. So even though normally you would say bias means the lower floor, but really the upper floor, the top floor, is also like the bias. It's part of the bias. So therefore, dor b'tachtena. So he goes from the 3rd floor to the 2nd floor. Just like he would go from the 2nd floor to the 1st floor, he could go from the 3rd floor to the 2nd floor. Now, nifches tachtena, what happens if he was living in the 2nd floor? And lepel, the 2nd floor became nifches. There's 4 tvachim in the 2nd floor, which got ruined. And normally, if there would only be a 2nd floor and a 1st floor, so he would be able to go down to the 1st floor. But over here, there's a 3rd floor. Now he said that aliyah zu, which meant the middle floor, shebebayizet. Now lepel, since the bayis is the entire structure, so there's like a svara to say that the 3rd floor is also part of the bayis. Although the 3rd floor is an aliyah, but lepel, legabi, the aliyah, it's called the bayis. In other words, there's the entire structure. So over here is a suffix. Im yoder bel yena, does he go to the upper floor? Whereas if nifches, he's in the middle floor. Does he go to the upper floor? Or does he go to the lower floor? The fichach le yoder, he really can't come down into the lower floor. He can't come down into the lower floor because he could taina that you have no right to come to the lower floor. You belong in the upper floor. In those be'emes, the upper floor and the lower floor both belong to the same person. But lepel, he could taina, I don't want you in the lower floor, I want you only in the upper floor. Now, v'im dar, but lepel, if he comes down onto the lower floor, ein mitzineis misham. Remember, they asked the shayla, the lechura, ametzim mechaver ol varaya, and karka is dok becheskas ba'aleh imedes, so now you're coming into my karka, and there's a suffix whether you're allowed to be here. So lechura, why do we say ein mitzineis misham? Whereas if you would be teifus and metaltalin, so we say tefisa helps. But over here, you're like a squatter. You're coming into my karka, and there's a question whether or not you're allowed to be here. So l'chura, why shouldn't be mitzineis misham? So the answer is the Nesiva says this because be'etzem for sure the owner of this house is mechuyev to provide him a place to be. The question is, does he have to be on the upper floor? Does he have to be on the lower floor? So if there would be a question if Bechlal he has a right to be here, so then we won't say that if he came into the floor, so you don't take him out. But over here, he definitely has either the upper floor or the lower floor. He's living in the middle floor. Lepel, the floor of the middle floor got ruined. So Mele, he has a right to go down, either down or up. So in Mele, so the person on the Labayas could say, no, you have no right to go down, you should go up. But Lepel, if he went down, and since for sure he owes him something, the question is where he owes him, so then we say, Ein mitzineis misham. That's a chidush. In other words, since Lepel, he owes him something, and the question is where he owes him, so then the din is, if he's living on the lower floor, he could stay there. Now, Maise be'echod, she'amar lechaveri dalazu, Shal gabi afarsik hazeh ani maskelecha. Because he had a vine, and that vine was hanging over a peach tree, and he said, I'm renting you this vine, which is lying on this peach tree. So again, it's like the aliyah, which is al gabi abayis. So the peach tree is like mishubed to support this vine. And v'nekar ilan afarsik memkemer lepel, the peach tree got ruined, was uprooted from its place. Uba mais lefnei chacham v'amru le chayev atal lahamed afarsik kol zman shadolas kayamis. And as long as this vine is still around, so therefore you're mechuyev to provide it, so to speak, with a peach tree in order for the vine to be draped over the peach tree. Not so clear. Why does it have to be dafka peach tree? Whereas l'chure, the point was that there was a tree there that the vine was draped over. But Lepeli said, "Afarsik zed, this peach tree." So Mela is saying that you have to provide him a peach tree, another peach tree, in order for him to have a place where to drape over this vine.